The Philadelphia 76ers are coming off an impressive win over the Los Angeles Clippers in which they got their revenge against James Harden. The game did lose some of its luster without Joel Embiid, with it being a 3:30 Sunday game and a little bit of the displeasure and frustration with the end of the James Harden era, I guess, kind of sinking away a little bit. Obviously, it wasn't the built-up matchup that I think I personally was hopeful for and expected it to be leading into the season, but obviously bigger games on the horizon. Sixers still awaiting for the return of Joel Embiid, but that appears to be inching closer. They play their final game on the West Coast trip tonight against the Sacramento Kings. We will see how things shake up there, as there is less than 12 games left in the season before we approach the playoffs. So obviously need Joel Embiid to come back soon, but still a lot to talk about with the roster at hand. And at the forefront of my mind is the management of Ricky Council IV. This is a guy who's become a fan favorite across the Sixers world. He's a guy that plays harder than anyone else on the floor every second that he's out there, and a guy that I thought had carved out a nice role for himself, but that does not seem to be the case of late. So I want to talk a little bit about my frustrations, why I believe this is so important that the Sixers should have capitalized on this already, and what the outlook can be for here. So I want to talk a little bit about the circumstances first. That Ricky Council is on a two-way contract. He is a guy that has spent time in the G League, and I believe proven too good to be at the G League. To dive into his stats there, that on the season playing just 9 games, as he primarily has been with the Sixers, especially of late, but in those 9 games, averaging 23.2 points, 2.3 assists, 5.1 rebounds, shooting 39.6% from 3 on 5.3 three-point attempts per game. That is a big storyline, as that is the biggest reason that he went undrafted this season, is there was some skepticism in his three-point shooting ability. The form, the effectiveness of it, and obviously the numbers do not lie. It's looked considerably better at this point in the season. I do believe that there have been some mechanical adjustments in his form that have translated to greater success, and that's a huge sign. Not only that, obviously, the results are following, but the fact that he was willing to make those adjustments, I think says a lot about him as a player and his desire to be great. So that is a very encouraging sign to me, and something that I think changes his entire ceiling as a player. Now at the Sixers, it felt like that he was beginning to carve out a role, that he's got the opportunity due to the slew of injuries that the Sixers have dealt with, and by the way, are still dealing with, as we're still awaiting the return of guys like Robert Covington, Anthony Melton, and obviously Joel Embiid, that Ricky Council IV is the guy that has made the most of the opportunity. That early on in the season, he was inactive for 38 of the Sixers' 39 first games, and then he began to see some time. So to take a look at his game log here, you can see in and out of the rotation, but it's been a little bit frustrating of late that these opportunities have slipped down a little bit. That we're talking about, there were games where he's playing 29 minutes, 20 minutes, 22 minutes, 19 minutes, and all of a sudden, 12 minutes, 2 minutes. He played just 2:34 in yesterday's victory over the Clippers, 6:29 the other day, 6:21, 8:49. The bottom line is that his opportunity has shrunk. Now, Ricky, I believe, has handled himself like a professional through all this, but it is frustrating from the Sixers standpoint why this guy is on a two-way deal. And I want to talk a little bit about the difference of those. So I want to dive into this specifically here, and I will touch on. It says, this is written by Brian Toperick of Liberty Ballers here. He writes, players on two-way contracts can play up to 50 regular season games with their teams each year, which neither Council nor Smith are in any danger of exceeding. That meaning Terquavion Smith there. Players on two-way contracts also aren't eligible to play in the playoffs unless they get their contracts converted before the end of the regular season. Something would have to go catastrophically wrong if the Sixers need to rely on Council or Smith in the playoffs outside of garbage time. They're getting plenty of run now, but they'll be phased out of the rotation whenever Embiid, Batum, Melton, and Covington eventually return. They've shown enough flashes to merit a long-term investment, though. The Sixers used $2.8 million of their non-taxpayer mid-level exception to sign Kyle Lowry, according to ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski, but they still have plenty of it remaining. It will expire at the end of the season, so they're in a use-it-or-lose-it mode with the leftover portion of the MLE. If the Sixers converted Council or Smith using the minimum exception, they'd be limited to offering a 2-year deal. If they use a portion of the non-taxpayer MLE, they're allowed to offer up to 4. They won't want to meaningfully cut into their potential cap space this summer, but they could always make the remaining years of the contract non-guaranteed if either Council or Smith was willing. Otherwise, they'll have to fill out their roster with minimum contracts next year either way, and Council and Smith on a minimum deal would be slightly cheaper than a veteran with 2 or more years of NBA experience. So a lot to digest here from this. The most notable points is obviously that at this point in time, Ricky Council will be ineligible for the postseason. That is not the biggest storyline to me, that I think it's unlikely that he's asked to do much in the postseason or really play at all. But I do think the bigger point here is setting the Sixers team up for long-term success. That this is an old Sixers team, that currently there are just 5 players on roster under the age of 28, those 5 being Tyrese Maxey, De'Anthony Melton, Paul Reed, Mo Bamba, and KJ Martin. And out of those 5, Tyrese Maxey and maybe Paul Reed are the only ones I'm confident will be with the Sixers for the long haul. I do hope Anthony Melton makes that list, but obviously injuries are a point of concern, and there's a lot to be answered that we do not know behind the scenes there. But adding a guy like Ricky Council IV accomplishes a lot. Number one, it's that splash of athleticism. It's that splash of youth to inject in this team. You have a chance to get him at a team-friendly contract. If you throw him some guaranteed money on a 4-year basis, as is possible, as Brian laid out the route there, that is an opportunity to get a guy at the early point of his career and watch him develop into something that is far above the value that you're paying him. These Sixers have done this before. Shake Milton is a prime example of a guy that was a second-round pick. The Sixers signed to a multi-year deal, and he ultimately ended up being a far more productive player than the number attached to him dictated. Now, do I expect, is Shake Milton a world changer? Obviously not, but there is still a point in value to have a guy that plays capable rotational minutes on a bargain deal. That is the exact opportunity that they have with Rick Council IV. And by the way, while I still remain a Terquavion Smith guy at heart and love his game and still believe him in the long term, I don't think it's particularly close that Ricky Council IV has separated himself as the better and more ready NBA prospect. But I did want to talk about why these Sixers could wait before I get fully judgmental here. So this also coming from Brian Toparik of the Liberty Ballers here, and he writes, there's no huge rush to sign either guy to a standard contract. They could stage a quiet tournament between the two, this meaning Ricky Council IV and Terquavion Smith, until their banged-up roster gets closer to full strength, and the winner would get his contract converted. But rather than sign another exempt corpse like Dwayne Dedmon, who has no prayer of playing meaningful minutes in the playoffs, the Sixers would be better of making an investment in the youth talent pipeline by converting one of their two-way guys. Morey said Friday that he's open to it. Quote, we like having open roster spots, whether it's for players who might become available or even signing young players to favorable long deals. I think it's a smart move if we can do it. The Sixers could always wait until the offseason to sign either player to a standard deal, but they'd run the risk of another team poaching them in free agency. They'd also have to dip into whatever mid-level exception they had to sign them to more than a 2-year deal. They could sign them to the additional years if they use the MLE this season, and they still have their full MLE at the disposal of the offseason. The odds of Council or Smith becoming a rotation caliber player, much less anything more than that, aren't especially high, but the odds of a dustball like Joe Harris giving them anything beyond the season are even lower. It'd be better to spend that last roster spot on a minimal chance of a young guy popping and either becoming a rotation player for these Sixers or fetching a return via trade from another team. A lot again there. But number one, I'll just push back on that I am a believer that Ricky Council IV can be a rotational player. And that's all I'm asking. I'm not saying this is the next face of the franchise or Tyrese Maxey's running mate. But what I'm saying is this guy can effectively play 15, 20 minutes a game at the NBA level, and I believe will throughout the course of his career. He just finds ways to impact winning. And he does it without having anything created for him. That oftentimes his impact are things like putback dunks, him creating off cuts on the offensive end without the ball in his hand. Defensively, he's been very good. He's had a couple blocks that have really impressed me. His verticality and athleticism really pop on both ends of the floor. And some of those dunks are just awesome to watch. Like he had a three the other day in the Clippers game in these like 2 minutes of play that I thought was really cool. I am a believer in the progress. So I'm more in on Ricky Council, and I think that would indicate from Brian there. And the other point that he hit on is this last sentence here, which it says, or fetching a return via trade from another team. That is another key part of this, is when these Sixers are looking to wheel and deal and upgrade, you have to have things to give up to get. I'm not saying I want to trade Ricky, but if it's not playing out, that's a worthwhile piece that can throw in. It's more important to lock him up, make sure that you have him on a long-term basis, and potentially flip him for something better, rather than hoping that something better comes along. And when they're so limited already on the amount of young talent, as I mentioned, just 5 guys under 28, and Tyrese Maxey really the only one that is a stable part of this franchise, this is a worthwhile piece to add. That why not add him to the mix and just see what he turns into? Because I'm seeing the work, I'm seeing the impact, and I just like having this guy around. That I do believe in the talent, the athleticism. He's the type of player that I want to bring in. And Ricky himself seems to believe that he's earned a role as well, and he should. That he had this quote a couple weeks back saying, after putting up 13 points and 4 rebounds in Wednesday's loss to the Miami Heat, one has to wonder if Council IV is ready for regular playing time when the Sixers come back from the All-Star break. Quote, I feel like I've made a statement for sure, he said after the loss. Now it's just up to everybody else if they felt the same way. At this stage of the season and his young career, Council IV is just looking to continue to grow and build as a young player. He's taking in any feedback he has received from his coaches and his teammates as he looks to move forward as a player. Quote, it's just game by game, he added. They tell me to stay ready. They're proud of me. My teammates, for one, are super big in keeping positive thoughts in my head and just being able to stay ready so the coaches are just showing trust in me when they put me in the game. That's all I need to see. So overall, a well-handled quote there, and I do like that he's showing his hungriness, his belief in himself without coming off over the top. I think he's handled himself very well throughout the entire process. And by the way, it is not the easiest role as a player to be a guy that you don't know if you're playing on a night-to-night basis, that you're always sitting at the end of the bench saying, maybe today's the day. Maybe I can make an impact. And to Ricky's credit, he has stepped up and answered that call just about on every single opportunity that he's given, that he is a guy that does a lot with a little, that he creates opportunities for himself and finds ways to put his fingerprints on each matchup. And people love Ricky Council IV, by the way. I mean, I'm talking about people getting tattoos of him and his face on them. Shout out to the Rights to Ricky Sanchez people for the LA trip and for posting that right there. But that is the type of player that people do fall in love with. And that is important, that you do have to have these likable guys. Tyrese Maxey, another example. Paul Reed, another example of a fan favorite. Ricky Council IV is cut from a similar mode. And again, a guy that I do believe in as a talent. And for the Sixers specifically, why my concern and why I believe they have to act now is you don't want to give another team a chance to get in there and snag him away. And when I say that, I don't mean this season. I'm talking about getting to the offseason when his two-way contract expires and he becomes a free agent. I do believe he's shown enough that not just myself has noticed, but maybe some other teams, he's piqued their interest. And they say, maybe we can kick the tires on him, give him the team-friendly deal that the Sixers have failed to produce or bring to the table. And now on the other side of things, this could be coming from Ricky the Council's camp, that he might be wanting to wait till the offseason to see what his full options are. And that's especially scary to me from the Sixers side of things, that to Ricky specifically, his contract could only be prorated if it's at a minimum contract value, and maybe he perceives himself as being an above minimum player. And I understand that at this point in time, that he wants to keep his options open, create the best career path for himself, whether that is in Philadelphia or elsewhere. And there's also a great deal of give and take with that, as the Sixers are not concrete in what their roster will look like for next year. We've talked so much about this salary cap plan, this keeping flexibility, but for a guy like Ricky Council IV, that might involve you or that might not. That this Sixers team might fill up with veteran players, and all of a sudden you don't have a role. So I understand all the layers of this conversation, but the bottom line is, when you have a talent, a young talent in the organization, you should do whatever you can to keep him. Don't let Ricky Council become the next Isaiah Joe or the next Charles Bassey or the next Jaden Springer. Make him be a guy that you invest in, you develop, and ends up playing a role or turns into something better for this Sixers team. That is the opportunity that they have in front of them. That is the opportunity they cannot afford to waste, and that is why they must sign this guy to a standard NBA deal right now. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you agree with me? Are you all in on the Ricky the Council IV experience in the way that I am? Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button, dropping a like on the video, and I'll be talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.